November 1945. Frankfurt, Germany. The war is technically over, but if you look at the skyline, you wouldn't know it. The city is a skeleton of jagged concrete and twisted steel. The air smells of wet ash and unwashed bodies. It is the beginning of the hunger winter, a season so cold that the ink would freeze in the inkwells of the military police stations. Just outside the city limits sat Camp Miller, a sprawling American supply depot, surrounded by 3 layers of barbed wire and guarded by men who just wanted to go home. In a place built to contain the enemy, Private Jack Harrison wasn't just guarding prisoners, he was hiding a family. Specifically 3 children. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A prison camp is a fortress of surveillance. Searchlight sweep the grounds every 30 seconds, cutting through the freezing fog. Patrols march every hour, boots crunching on the frozen mud. Yet right under the noses of the United States Army, a nursery was growing in the shadows of a concrete bunker. Fraternization was treason. The orders from General Eisenhower were absolute. Do not touch. Do not speak. Do not trust. She was the enemy. Under military law, even holding her hand was a crime that could send him to the brig for years. But Jack Harrison didn't just break the rules. He shattered them. While his commanders slept in warm barracks, playing poker and smoking. Lucky strikes, he was living a double life with the very woman he was supposed to keep locked up. Imagine the terror of that existence. One cry, one suspicious diaper found in the trash, one cough at the wrong moment. That was the difference between survival and a court-martial. For 3 years they played the most dangerous game of hide and seek in military history. This is the story of how love flourished in a cage, and the insane lengths a soldier went to protect the enemy from his own army. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the chaos of 1945. Germany was a smoking ruin. The Allied bombing campaigns had turned cities like Frankfurt into moonscapes. The population was starving. They called it the Stunde Null, the 0 hour. Jack Harrison was 22 years old, a farm boy from Ohio, assigned to the 3rd Armored Division. He had seen combat. He had seen friends die, but nothing prepared him for the occupation. His job was to guard the supply depot at the edge of the camp, a warehouse filled with mountains of sea rations, wool blankets, and medical supplies. Everything the German population didn't have. Her name was Elena. She wasn't a soldier. She was a civilian prisoner, a nurse who had been swept up in the mass arrests during the denazification process. She was 20 years old, with eyes the color of broken glass. She was starving. Jack first saw her through the chain-link fence near the laundry detail. She wasn't begging. She was just standing there, shivering in a thin gray coat that was 3 sizes too big for her. It started with a chocolate bar. A Hershey's tropical bar passed through the wire. In 1945, a chocolate bar was worth more than gold. It could buy you a week of safety. It could buy you silence. Jack didn't want anything in return. He just saw a human being freezing to death. The chocolate bar turned into a pair of wool socks. The socks turned into a conversation in broken German. Jack found a blind spot. Every prison has one. Beneath the supply depot there was an old maintenance tunnel. It was part of the pre-war storm drain system that had been bombed out and boarded up by the engineers. The Americans thought it was collapsed. Jack checked. It wasn't. It was damp. It smelled of rust and stagnant water. But it was private. That tunnel became their home. But biology doesn't follow military regulations. In the winter of 1946, the temperature dropped to 20 degrees below zero. The Rhine River froze solid. And in the freezing darkness of that tunnel, Elena whispered the words that terrify any soldier in his position. She was pregnant. In the civilian world, a pregnancy is a celebration. In a prison camp involving a guard and a prisoner, it is evidence of a crime. They couldn't go to the infirmary. The camp doctor would report Jack immediately to the military police. Fraternization was punishable by dishonorable discharge and prison time. For Elena, it meant being transferred to a high-security facility miles away. So they engineered a deception that defied belief. Jack stole oversized winter coats from the supply room. In the winter of 1946, everyone in Germany looked like a walking pile of rags. The women were called Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. They wore every piece of clothing they owned just to stay warm. This was their camouflage. Elena wrapped herself in layers of wool, binding her stomach with strips of torn blanket to hide the curve. She learned to walk with a hunch, feigning a back injury to keep the guards away. When the labor pains began, there was no sterile room, no anesthesia, just the cold floor of the maintenance tunnel, lit by a single kerosene lamp that Jack had stolen from the motor pool. Jack stood guard at the metal door, his M1 Garand rifle shaking in his hands, terrified that a patrol would walk by. He timed his patrols to coincide with her contractions. Inside, Elena bit down on a thick leather belt to stifle the screams. She pushed in silence. She cried in silence. The only sound was the dripping of condensation from the concrete ceiling. The first baby was a girl. They named her Hope. Now Jack had a new problem. Logistics. How do you feed a newborn in a prison camp? He became a master thief. He couldn't just take extra food from the mess hall, because the cooks counted every tray. So he skimmed. He ate half his own rations and smuggled the rest too. The tunnel in his pockets. He learned the black market value of everything. A carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes was worth $150 on the streets of Frankfurt. Jack stopped smoking. He traded his cigarette rations for powdered milk. He traded his soap rations for vitamins. He stole coal one lump at a time, hiding it in his boots to keep the tunnel from freezing. But the hardest part wasn't the food. It was the noise. Jack and Elena taught their daughter the quiet game. Before she could even walk, the child learned that silence meant safety. When footsteps approached overhead, heavy combat boots crunching on the gravel, Jack would put a finger to his lips, and the baby, watching the fear in her parents' eyes, would go still. It was a childhood lived in the negative spaces of the war. They rigged a system. A red piece of cloth tied to the ventilation grate meant danger. A green cloth meant it was safe to whisper. A year later, it happened again. Another pregnancy, another winter, another baby born on the concrete floor. A boy this time. The risks didn't just double, they multiplied. Now there were 2 mouths to feed, 2 voices to 4. Hush. Jack was exhausted. He lost 30 pounds. His eyes were sunken. His uniform hung off his frame. His commanding officer joked that he looked like he was fighting the war all by himself. By 1948, they had 3 children living in the dark. The tunnel had become a bizarre domestic bubble. Jack had rigged a small electric heater using stolen copper wire tapped into the camp's main grid. He lined the walls with wool blankets to dampen the sound. He brought them picture books he found in the ruins of a German library. He brought them toys carved from ammunition crates. For 3 years, he lived 2 lives. By day, he was Private Harrison, the loyal American soldier, saluting officers and standing guard. By night, he was a father raising a family underground, changing diapers made from torn parachutes. But secrets are like radioactive waste. They have a half-life, and eventually they leak. The tension in the camp changed. In the spring of 1948, the Berlin airlift was starting. Tensions with the Soviets were rising. The U.S. Army was reorganizing. The order came down in May. Camp Miller was to be liquidated. The unit was shipping out back to the United States. The supply depot was to be emptied. Jack stood in the tunnel looking at his 3 children and the woman he loved. The walls were closing in. If the engineers came to inspect the tunnel before they left, they would find the blankets. They would find the toys. They would find the family. Jack had a choice. He could leave. He had enough points to go home. He could get on that troop transport ship, go back to Ohio, marry a nice girl from his high school, and pretend this never happened. He could leave Elena to the mercy of a broken Germany. She would be released as a displaced person with 3 illegitimate children and no way to survive. She would likely starve. Jack Harrison made his choice. He spent his entire savings, 3 years of combat pay and hazardous duty bonuses. He went to the black market in the ruins of the Frankfurt train station. He didn't buy cigarettes. He bought a truck driver. On a rainy Tuesday night, Jack Harrison committed his final act of treason. He requisitioned a deuce-and-a-half truck from the motor pool. He forged the signature of his commanding officer on the dispatch papers. He drove the truck to the back of the supply depot, near the tunnel entrance. He loaded 3 large wooden crates onto the back of the truck. He labeled them medical, surplus. Handle with care. Inside the crates, buffered by stolen wool blankets, and breathing through air holes drilled into the wood, were Elena and the children. The baby was sedated with a small dose of cough syrup to keep him from crying. The drive to the port of Bremerhaven took 6 hours. It was a drive through hell. The roads were still damaged from the war. Military police checkpoints were everywhere. At the first checkpoint, a young MP shone his flashlight into the cab. Jack gripped the steering. wheel his knuckles white. He had his service pistol on the seat next to him. He prayed he wouldn't have to use it. The MP asked for his papers. Jack handed over the forged dispatch. The MP looked at the crates in the back. "What's in the boxes, soldier?" Jack didn't blink. "Typhus samples. Heading for the lab in Bremerhaven. You don't want to open them, buddy." The MP stepped back. Typhus was the one thing soldiers feared more than the Russians. He waved him through. When they reached the port, Jack drove past the military docks where the troop ships were, waiting. He didn't go there. If he tried to get them on a U.S. military ship, he would be caught. Instead, he drove to the civilian commercial docks. He used the last of his money and a bag full of stolen nylons to bribe the captain of a rusty freighter bound for Buenos Aires, Argentina. It was the only place they could go. South America didn't ask questions in 1948. Jack Harrison parked the truck. He took off his dog tags. He took off his uniform jacket and threw it into the harbor waters. He left his rifle. He left his country. He carried the crates onto the ship one by one. As the freighter pulled away from the dock, Jack stood on the stern, watching the lights of Germany fade into the mist. He was a deserter. In the eyes of the U.S. Army, he was a criminal. If they caught him, he would face a firing squad, or 20 years in Leavenworth. But as he opened the crates in the cargo hold and saw his children sleeping peacefully, he knew he wasn't a criminal. They settled in a small town outside Buenos Aires. For decades, neighbors knew them as a quiet couple. Jack worked as a mechanic. Elena worked as a seamstress. They spoke Spanish, with a strange accent. They never spoke about the war. They never spoke about the camp. Jack Harrison never went back to Ohio. He never saw his parents again. He sacrificed his past to give his children a future. It wasn't until 50 years later, when Jack was an old man dying in a hospital bed, that he told his grandchildren the truth. He told them about the tunnel under the supply depot. He told them about the chocolate bar passed through the fence. He told them about the silence. He looked at his wife holding his hand. Her hair was gray now, but her eyes were still the color of broken glass. He squeezed her hand and said with his final breath, "I built a prison for others. But inside that prison, I found my freedom." The U.S. Army listed Jack Harrison as missing in action. For years, his file sat in a dusty cabinet in the Pentagon, marked unsolved. They assumed he had been killed by black marketeers or lost in the chaos of the occupation. They assumed he was a casualty of the peace. They never knew that the soldier who vanished hadn't lost his life. He had simply found a better one, hiding in the dark,